Hi everyone. It's actually about, I don't know, almost 6 o'clock, I think, on Friday evening. I wanted to get this done this morning, but there were just a lot of things going on around here. At any rate, it was great to see everyone at the Zoom meeting. And I wanted to add a little something here. When I first thought of doing this, when I thought about the audience, I thought there'd be about 4 people, and I thought it would be all people I knew and people who were pretty experienced sewists. That's certainly not the case, and there are quite a few who are at a advanced beginner stage. Let's say that. So I wanted to say a couple things about needles. First of all, for your sewing machine needles, I would like to see you use a microtex needle, and I would use, probably for the weight fabric that we're doing, nothing bigger than a number 70. So remember, needles get fatter, thicker as the numbers go up. So a number 70 is good. And if you're sewing on like a really fine batiste or organdy or organza, you might even want to use a 60 or a 65. You don't see 65s too much, but they are out there somewhere. So I really like those microtex needles. They have a lovely sharp point. Change your sewing machine needle every time you do a major project. And I'm not saying if you sit down to sew 2 seams, then you need to change your needle, but every time you make a whole dress, or whatever your rather large project is, change your sewing machine needle. Okay, so that's sewing machine needles. Now, hand needles. I like to do handwork, sewing handwork with a sharp. It's called a sharp needle. Has a small eye. They go through the fabric nicely. Now, I'm going to tell you that I never used really anything bigger than a number 11. If you can't thread a number 11, then your eyesight is not good enough to be doing this kind of work, and you need to get some kind of supplement eyewear. Now, I wear trifocals. They're progressive lenses, but even the close-up is really not strong enough to be doing some of the things that we need to do, and one of those is threading a needle. There are many other things too. So I watched a lot of people over the years that had very fancy magnification, but I had one teacher, Wendy Shane, who always wore a pair of glasses over her glasses. And I thought, well, if it's good enough for her, it's good enough for me. And that's what I do. I put a pair of readers over my other glasses, and it works great. I can thread needles. I can do fine shadow work and feather stitching, and I even use it sometimes when I'm doing something very intricate on the machine. I've talked to my eye doctor about it extensively, and he said it's absolutely fine as long as you're not doing it all the time. But for the way I use it, he said it's fine. It's kind of nice even when you're sitting watching TV, because they're down a little further on your nose and you can look up and still see TV. So that's that. Now, as far as smocking needles go, a lot of people use a number 8 embroidery needle. I can't remember the name of it right now. Anyway, a number 8 embroidery needle. I use a number 7 long darner. So now remember, a 7 is a little fatter than an 8. And the reason I like it, well, there's a number of reasons. So it's a long darner, and it lets me use the tip of my needle to get in between the pleats real well. But the thickness of it being a little thicker than an 8, it doesn't wear out my floss quite as easily, because you're making a bigger hole for the needle to go through and the floss to follow. So it doesn't wear the floss quite as much. When I do picture smocking, I use a number 5 darner, because you're using 4 strands of floss, and that whole makes a nice hole that you can then flatten your threads out for good coverage. Okay, so I just wanted to add that little bit. Now, I am going to teach you a technique that I think is the best thing you're going to learn in this whole thing. It is not my technique. It was featured in a tip column in Creative Needle in 2005 by a woman whose name is Martha Shaw. She was one of the former owners of the Smockingbird in Birmingham, Alabama, which Valencia, you may be familiar with. It's a lovely shop. She does not own it any longer, but she had this tip in the magazine, and I have tried it, and I've loved it, and I've used it ever since. So this is how we're going to do this, both front and back yokes. So I have here, and I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to reposition the camera a few times. So I have my front yoke. It's interfaced, okay? And I have my piping all made that has a 1/2 inch seam allowance, right? And so now you're going to see why that's important to trim that seam allowance. And if you don't have one of those fancy rulers with the groove in it to cut your piping, you can do this. You can take a ruler and put it down at a 1/2 inch and mark it, and keep doing that. And then you can take a rotary cutter or your scissors and cut all along those dots, okay? But I would advise that you invest in one of those rulers at some point in time if you're going to continue doing this. It'll make your life a lot easier. Okay, so I'm going to take these two things to the sewing machine. And it'll take me a second to get this adjusted so that you can see what I'm doing. Oops, not like that. Go 2. Ooh, that's pretty good. Get our focus. Okay. So, here's the bottom of my yoke right here, and here's my piping. I'm going to lay those two. I'm going to put those edges together, line them up. I know it's a 1/2 inch, and I'm going to go back under my piping foot. Now, remember I told you that to make yourself a little piece of paper with the measurement of where your needle is when you made your piping. So my measurement was 1.5 millimeters. So now with my sewing machine, I'm going to click that needle back over. Just watch the needle. 1 click. And it's going to fall just a smidge closer to the piping cord, okay? And very simply, I am going to stitch this. Oop, wait a minute. I did that wrong. Sorry. I did something. Oh, I did this in the wrong direction. That's why. There we go. Let me just take that out. Okay. So I've moved the needle from 1.5. So here was, let me start over again. Here was 1.5. All right, over to the right. And now I'm going to click that needle back over to 1.25. Okay, got my edges lined up. I'm going to put my presser foot down and stitch. And all I have to do is keep those edges even. And I sew all the way across. Okay. I'm just going to clip off a little bit of this piping because I don't need so much. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this to the ironing board and I'm going to press this seam allowance up like that, okay? You don't need to see that part. I'll be right back. Now we're going to go back over here. All right. So now I have my piece that looks like this. My seam allowance is pressed up. Okay. And that's how it looks in the front. Very neat. Okay. Now is when I take my Wonder tape, that is a Wonder, and I put it on the seam allowance. So I've cut myself a piece of Wonder tape. Here it is. And I'm going to lay that, and I don't put it right down by the seam because I actually like to go in afterward and pull it out. Even though it's machine washable, I like to just pull it out if I can. All right, so I'm going to lay that across there. Whoops. Like that. Doesn't have to be perfect. And then I have to, okay, there we go, okay? Then I have to take the paper off. So I'm going to peel the paper off, and you can't see it because it's clear. I mean, you could see it if you were here. Maybe I can show you. Let me see. Let me do this. And that. And you can just barely see that tape on there. It's pretty clear. Okay. So now what I need to do is get everything out of the way, and I need to get my little skirt. And I've already blocked my skirt, so I know it's going to fit. And I'm going to do this. Hold on. Let me get it all organized here. I usually do this at the ironing board, but it's a little hard with the camera. Okay, so here I have my fabric, right? I'm going to turn this, make sure we focus. Okay. Now I'm going to take my, well, first of all, let's even out your pleats a little, make sure they're not all like gathered up in one spot. And then you're going to take your piece and you can place it right, I got to stand up so I can see what I'm doing. You can place it right onto the pleats where you want it to fall. Okay, there's no hard and fast rules about this either. It's what visually looks good to you. Now, it is a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so you want to be kind of close to what a 1/2 inch would be, okay? But it's not like, you can't be way off of the seam allowance because then your linings won't fit, but I'm going to put mine a little bit closer, I think. So we're going to do this. Okay, and then you've got to kind of press down so that it sticks, right? So now it's stuck there in the position that you want. You've placed it perfectly. I don't know if mine's perfect, but you can be more careful than I was. Okay, there we go, right? Now what we're going to do is we're going to flip this down, put it back into the sewing machine, and sew. And it's not going to go anywhere because you've got the Wonder tape holding it down. All right, so now let me get it set up for the machine again. Hold on. What would take 2 seconds takes a lot longer here. All right, let's do this. We'll do a 2 and we'll go, whoops, I think it's going to go a little bit lower. Okay, so, but before you sew, now we are going to click this over one more time. So mine was 1.5. I clicked it to 1.25 for the first pass to put the piping on. And now I'm going to click it to 1. Now, you may not have as many adjustments on your machine, but you have enough to do this, okay? And if you can only click it once, that's okay too. So now I'm going to put it back under. So my piping is right under here. I can feel it. So I'm going to put my presser foot down with my mini piping foot. Remember, you can use your pin tuck foot as well. Now when I sew it this time, I want to start out here. I've clicked it over. Okay. And even if you don't click it over for this pass, if you sew right on your previous stitching, that's okay too. What you don't want to do is sew to the right of it out into the seam allowance, because then your previous stitching is going to show, which you don't want. I'm sorry if my hand's in the way. It's hard to remember to do all these things with the camera. Okay. Done. So now we're going to move back over here and I'll show you what it looks like. Hopefully it looks good. This would be the time I'd make a big mistake, right? Oops, wait a sec. Okay. So there it is, and it's pretty darn perfect. Okay. So now you're going to be ready to construct your garment, which I'll do in the next video. Okay, so that's how you do it. You do the same thing front and back and then just put it aside. Now, like I said, I like to go back in. It is washable, and if you leave it in, it will wash away. But I have placed it so that I can peel these apart where the tape is. And I can go in, even sometimes I use a pair of tweezers, and grab it and pull that whole thing out. If you've caught it in your sewing, then you will have a hard time doing this. But again, it will wash out. I just got to get a hold of it. Boy, this is a really sticky one. Okay, so now I got a hold of it. I can come back. I need to peel these apart for this purpose there, see? And I can take that whole strip right out. Let's talk about one other thing while we're here. When we go to construct this, we are going to remove the cording from the piping back to keep it out of the seam allowance, okay? So you don't have a big chunk of it in your seam allowance. But we'll do that when we're going to construct the dress. The thing I want to talk about right now is grading your seams. And I'm going to just have this upside down for now. So if you put this like this and feel it, you got a big old lump there. And sometimes you can see that big old ridge through your fabric, even though you have used interfacing. So we are going to do something called grading your seam allowance. And I'm going to talk about it right now, but I'm not going to do it because I usually go back and do another line of stitching before I do that, because as I said to you before, if a seam is going to give away, it's going to be this one when the child steps on the dress. But grading the seams, the seam allowances, means that you're going to do it so all of this doesn't come across in the same place. So you want your shortest one is going to be, I'll just show you a little piece here. Your shortest one is going to be your smocking, okay? And you would cut this all the way across, but I'm not going to do it right now. All right. And then your next one would be your piping. And I kind of usually do those together because it's kind of hard to do. You've got 4 layers of fabric, and one of them is really thick. It's your pleating, right? So then you're going to have that one that's going to come up a little bit above it, and then you've got your dress seam allowance that's going to come a little above that. Okay, so now you've got a stepped thing here that isn't going to be as bulky and isn't going to show like it might have before. Okay, so we'll do that again when we construct the dress, but at this point in time, you can take out your gathering thread. You no longer need that. And there it goes. All right. So that's how you do that part. And it looks sweet. Looks really nice. Okay. I want to teach you one other thing before we stop for the night. And that is a method of doing a French seam. This was taught to me. I have to change a couple things. I'm going to talk to you while I'm changing my thread and my presser foot. Excuse me. This was taught to me by Lynn Weeks. So a French seam is a way of finishing a seam that is very lovely. So basically what you do is you put your wrong sides together and you do a line of stitching. And then you turn it the opposite way and do right sides together. So now you've got a completely finished edge. But I learned a neat little trick, and I learned it from Lynn Weeks. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that name, but she was an Australian lady, well, she still is an Australian lady, who was living in America for quite a while. Her husband was working for an international company, and she was an excellent seamstress, and she taught classes for Saga, and I actually was fortunate enough to go to a couple of her schools out in Illinois. And she taught me this technique. And I just have to find the appropriate, where did I put that presser foot? Darn it. Well, okay, here we go. I'll use this one. It's not the one I wanted, but it's fine. So you need a zigzag foot. All right. So this is going to yield a French seam that is about 1/8 of an inch wide. It's miraculous. So I did do it on the 1/4 inch seam. It's better to have a 3/8 inch seam, but you can do it on a 1/4 inch seam. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to, and you don't have to do this once you get good at it, but to keep your measurements correct, you probably need to do it to start with. So I have made, I'm going to pretend that my seam allowance here is a 1/2 inch because it's just much easier to show you that way. So here, this line to the left is my 1/2 inch line. I want my French seam to end up being 1/8 to possibly 3/16, no bigger than that. Okay, so I make another line there. Okay. And then I come to my sewing machine and I set it up for a zigzag stitch. Oops. I set it up for a zigzag stitch. And it's going to be a very small zigzag stitch. No bigger, probably a 2. And the length should be like a 1.2. And I'm using maroon thread so that you guys can see it. And what you want to do is you want your needle, the left swing of your needle, to come almost to that first line here. Okay? You see that? I want the left swing of my needle to come almost to this line. We're going to be stitching out here. And I want the left to come right down the edge there of that. So you kind of have to play with it. I just turn my hand crank and make sure that that's where that's going to lie. Okay. And then I put my presser foot down. And I stitch. I'm going to actually just hold this for a second so you can maybe see it. Ooh, that's pretty good. Okay. Let's see if I can hold the camera and sew at the same time. Okay, so you get the point of that, okay? And I'll show it to you when it's done, but let me finish sewing that little seam. I mean, that little line of stitching. Oh my goodness! I think when I did this on the 1/4 inch seam, I used a 1.5 width. Okay, now this was with wrong sides together, okay? Which is kind of counterintuitive, but believe me, it's going to come out right. So I end up with something that looks like this, okay? So now I'm going to go to the sewing machine, and this is the iron. This is a friction pen, so these lines are going to disappear, but at this point it doesn't really make that much difference. You'll see why. But if you use a water-soluble pen, they'll still be there. Okay, so it's very important at this point that you go to the iron and you iron what you just sewed. Okay, we're going to go back out to a 1, okay? And the reason you do that, I'm real big on ironing. I think it's as important as sewing. You want the stitches to become part of your fabric, okay? That's why we use a lighter weight thread for doing heirloom sewing, because our fabric is lighter weight. We want that thread just to become part of the fabric. Okay, so now you've got this line of zigzagging. Lynn always called it melding the stitches because you kind of meld them into the fabric. Now you're going to come back with a real sharp pair of scissors and you're going to cut all the way up. And if you've got really good scissors, which these are really good scissors, but they're not as sharp as they could be right now, you can actually feel the holes where the needle went in the fabric, but you don't cut the stitches. It's pretty cool. If you don't have good scissors, get some. And Vaughn Pierce, she's just Vaughn.com, VAUNE.com. She carries very good scissors. I think she carries Dovos. These are Dovos, but they're no longer making this exact model. I don't think they're making the black ones anymore. Okay, so now you've got this. So now we're going to turn it the opposite way. And this time I will take you to the iron to show you what we do. Oops. Let's see if we can do this. So this time I'm gonna push that seam one way, and then I'm gonna push the seam the other way, and then I'm going to press it carefully so that the seam is right on the edge, and that's where it wants to be anyway. Okay, and then we're going to go back to the sewing machine. Okay, now at this point I'm going to change my presser foot again. If I can find my... Here it is. Okay, I'm going to use my 3-groove pin tuck foot. All right, see it's got, let me see if I can hold it so you can see it. It's got the 3 grooves on the bottom. Okay. I'm going to go back to a straight stitch, about a 2. And now I'm going to put this under here, and I'm going to put my, I want to get this really close from the front so that you can see it. I have put my little seam, my little French seam, in the middle groove. All right? Let me see. Let me do this. And, oh, let's do it 2. You see that? It's right in that middle groove. I could put it in any one of the grooves, actually. Whoops. And now when we stitch this, whoa, where are we? Okay. When we stitch this, that seam is going to ride in that groove so that you can do a little 1/8 inch seam. Now, if you tried doing this without the pin tack, you can do it, but because this is now like kind of a little bit of a lump, it wants your foot might want to slip off. You'll just have to kind of figure out what works for your machine. Okay, so we're going to stitch this now, but I need to move my needle over to the left this time, and I just have to kind of practice to see where that's a little bit much. So mine is over about 2.25 millimeters, I believe, is going to work. And you'll kind of get to know your own machine, like where it should be set. Okay, and so now I'm going to stitch, and I want you to see how that's riding in the little groove there. So again, let me see if I can do two things at once. All right. So can you see how that little seam is just riding in that groove? I'm going to go faster so we can just finish the seam. Oops, sorry. Apparently I can't do two things at once. Okay, now let's see what we got. All right, here's my little French seam. Look at it. I mean, really, that is 1/8 of an inch. It is slightly less than 1/8 of an inch. So you've got that lovely little seam down the side of your dress, or wherever you're going to use your French seam. It looks like this from the outside. There's no, one of the beauties of doing it with a zigzag first like that is that you don't have any little fraying from the previous seam that you did sticking out of the finished seam. So then you're going to go back to your iron again, press it one way, press it the other, and then press it flat to whichever way you want it to go. Whoops. And then you can come to the front and press it and make sure you don't have any kind of a pleat. Okay, so there it is from the front, and here it is from the inside, and you're done. So I just love that technique, and I thank Lynn very much in my thoughts all the time for doing it. So Lynn wrote this book, Lynn Weeks. It's called Precise and Professional, and I think she and her husband kind of published it themselves. The pictures were definitely homemade. They're a little creepy, but the text and the diagrams are great, and she is an excellent seamstress. And this, if you ever can come across this book, I would nab it because it's got real good very, very good techniques in it. So that's that. So I think that's it. The next time we're going to do construction of, getting those yokes into the dress. So continue on, and please email me if you have any issues. And I'm not going to set up another Zoom meeting until we are further along in the process. But I want to go ahead and do the videos so anyone can look at them that wants to. Alrighty, that's it. You guys have a great weekend. I hope it's going to be nice weather. Today was a real treat. And I will talk to you all soon. Bye.